Okay. Hello, my name is Alexis Lamontine, and my research topic is on the medicalization of childbirth and why it needs to end. So this first image I have here is just from a comic about a doctor speaking with a woman. It says, "So, you're due on the 17th?" And a woman responds, "I'm all booked that week. Let's go C-section on the 4th. How does 1 p.m. sound?" And the reason for me choosing this image is kind of represent on how childbirth is viewed today in society. And they tell you you're due on these within these few days, and if you're not, we're gonna induce you or labor, and kind of process like force the baby to come out. So my first slide, the medicalization of childbirth and why it needs to end, and some background on it. So the medicalization of childbirth and its effect on different women around the world is a long-standing problem that needs to be changed, and I feel like this is something that needs to be discussed and made more aware about. And throughout this research, I wanted to explore the different perspectives that people have on this topic, and the impact of medicalization of childbirth has on families in the United States, and discuss more about the importance on why this needs to be discussed and why this is something that needs to be changed. So, initially we had midwives as, the main way for childbirth, or at least people gave birth at home. But eventually, as times changed, technology developed, it was difficult to apply new technology at home, so that's kind of where the transition of hospitals became the main choice or the main route to take when it comes to giving birth. And this kind of started around the second half of the 20th century. And, this image here I have is just from a book cover. This is actually one of the sources I used within my research, Midwifery and the Medicalization of Childhood and Childbirth and Comparative Perspectives. And this is a good book discussing about the different perspectives that people have on childbirth and like reasoning behind it. Now, my research question. So, what influence does race have on the stigma of midwives and the now over medicalization of childbirth in the U.S.? Now, initially, when I started my research, I did have a difficult time trying to figure out what I wanted my research question to be. I did know what I wanted to discuss, and that being the medicalization of childbirth. And I did my research about the topic to kind of help me reach this question that I've gotten. And I'll explain that more in the next slide. But I want to get onto the images. So in this first image, so obviously you can see there's a woman giving birth in a hospital room, and she's surrounded by a lot of doctors and nurses in the room. And this picture really speaks volumes to me because it really shows the over medicalization of a childbirth. Why is it necessary to have all those doctors and nurses present in the room for a natural process for a woman? The second image I have is just an old kind of like historical image, of a midwife with the mother that's pregnant, just watching over her, making sure she's okay, and just walking her through the process of pregnancy and eventually childbirth. This last image shows a woman, obviously looks like she's very close to giving birth, have the midwife behind her comforting her, and you have two midwives below, and it seems as they're checking on her, checking vitals, probably checking if she's dilated enough, to give birth. Now, my methods, research, and findings. So initially when starting my research process, I wanted to just figure out what exactly did I want to research when it comes to the medicalization of childbirth, because just saying that is a pretty vague and broad topic. I had to narrow my point down. And within that, I used sources such as books, journals, and articles that helped me narrow my point and how I came across my research question, which was something, I didn't know about. And as I will discuss further on, how race has a play in the influence on the negative stigma of midwives and the reason we have, the medicalization of childbirth now. And, I felt like this was something important to talk about, to make more aware of, because of important points that I will further discuss in here. Things such as the health risk involved with the medicalization of childbirth, the high medical bills families are forced to pay post childbirth, and the negative stigma that midwives are portrayed as. And within this research, I found different reasons and different kind of outlooks and perspectives when it came to this topic. And, initially, I wasn't sure why there was a negative. Like, I knew there was a negative stigma. I had a some idea about why there was a negative stigma with midwives, but I didn't know the roots of that. And within that, I found that race was a major factor in the negative influence on midwives, which led to the medicalization of childbirth. And sexism and misogynistic views were major influencers as well to what midwives mean to people in the U.S. today, and why the medicalization of childbirth is a thing, why people choose hospitals to go to as a choice of giving birth. And I was pretty shocked when I discovered that. But initially, when midwifery was a thing, it was mostly black women and Native American women who were midwives. So back then, racism is still here, it's still present. But back then, you were still legally able to do things that shut people down because of their race. Now, they still do it. They just try to act like they can, but that's a whole other topic. But within that, they, put out this narrative about, hey, why would you want a black woman or a Native American woman working on you and helping you in close corners and in the process of giving birth to a child? Why don't you have this white male doctor who has the education, the money, and, like, let's be honest, the skin to be superior in the society, to be able to help you give birth to your child, deliver your child. And that's just kind of how this all started and pushed further on why midwives weren't the way to go, and you must go to the hospital to give birth versus, giving birth at home. Now, lastly, I want to talk about this conclusion and the implications of my research. So the important points, as I mentioned briefly previously, were the health risks, the high medical bills post-childbirth, and fighting the negative stigma associated with midwives. So first, with the health risks. Now, when I'm saying this, I'm not saying going to a hospital is dangerous for a mother to do. That's not the choice you should make, and that there is no health risk with giving birth at home, because there can be either way. I believe there are health risks either way. But I do want to make the point to say that, there are things given to a mother during her labor up until she gives birth. For example, epidural. I'm sure mothers do appreciate them not being able to feel the pain they get from contractions, but at the same time, there are side effects when it comes to that. There's pain from where the needle was used, and then use of epidural can lead to a difficulty of pushing your baby, which, will cause the result of doctors giving you more medication, the use of forceps, and then emergency C-section. The next point I want to discuss is the high medical bills post-childbirth. It's already obvious the healthcare system in the U.S. is really not the best. There are a lot of people who are struggling with health insurance to be able to afford just health insurance, help them with their basic needs. And, imagine a people coming from a low income level family, going to a hospital, giving birth, and them having to deal with the high medical bills post-childbirth, and how that further pushes them into debt. And right now, that's the last thing these families need, is to be in debt. Trying to worry about having insurance for themselves, and their newborn child, caring for the child, and it's just a lot of stress. The last point I want to discuss is fighting the negative stigma associated with midwives. And so far, there's a lot, of negativity around them and how they're portrayed. And the stigma begin with the roots of racial segregation. And, race issues is something that's very deep into the history of U.S., and it's something very tough and complex to fight, and something that's just been present for years on, and who knows if this will ever be something that will end. And as I mentioned before, sexism and misogyny was very further pushing the narrative about how midwives weren't the way to go. And like this image, for example, I chose because initially when midwifery was more prevalent and more used, people would accuse them of being witches or working with the devil. And we just don't want that, narrative being pushed any further. And hopefully from out of this, you'll get that, I'm not saying going to a hospital is the wrong thing to do or the right thing to do, but you should be able to know all your options when it's time to give birth to your child, and to know that midwifery and choosing that route is not a bad thing. It should not be looked down upon. And right here, these are the sources, the